got a message from a longtime viewer and supporter on Patreon raising the issue of the practical impossibility of being 100% vegan with reference to the use of bone char in sugar. So I know as vegans we do like to give vegetarians a hard time in terms of the distinction that vegetarians make implicitly or explicitly, but many vegetarians explicitly do discuss this in terms of their rationalization for consuming milk and cheese, but not consuming, the flesh of cows. The distinction that vegetarians make between a product and a byproduct. Now, if you're vegan, you probably regard that as a lazy moral excuse, in that you would think if you buy milk, you are still supporting the dairy industry. If in fact you buy leather, you're still supporting the dairy industry, because the production of milk and the production of leather are in fact two separate stages of one and the same industry. When you buy milk, you're paying for veal, and when you buy veal, you're paying for milk. They're not really separable in terms of the cycle of production, and we may say the cycle of suffering, and the cycle of both ecological damage and exploitation of animals that's involved. Now, that having been said, there are limits to this practically in the life of a vegan. So this person writes to me and says, I watched a video from a channel called Vegan in Japan about Japanese candy and why Japanese candy is not vegan, because the refined cane sugar they use has been processed with bone char in Japan. So this is an issue I have been aware of for a very long time. I think most of you are aware of it. Maybe some of you are surprised. But this is not the addition of animal bone to sugar, but it is using animal bone in the filtration, in the refinement of the sugar. So in parallel to this, there are some methods used in making beer that likewise filter out some of the impurities from beer by using a gelatin-like substance called isinglass. So I believe when you are eating the sugar, you are not eating the bone char, or you're not eating a significant quantity of it. Maybe there's a trace amount there, but you are paying for the company to buy animal bones, and those are a byproduct of the production of meat, and to use animal bones in the production of refined white sugar. Now, to be clear, not all sugar has this problem. If you're in a Western country, the easiest way is to choose a turbinado sugar, as it's called. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's not a word that's in my normal vocabulary. But there are some forms of brown sugar, and you'll notice they don't quite have the same glistening appearance. And those do not rely on the use of bone char to produce them. And they're not even marketed as vegan. There's simply more than one way to refine sugar, and they don't all involve the use of bone char. However, if you're buying something like a chocolate bar, you have no way of knowing whether or not the sugar used to make that chocolate bar is vegan. Depending on where you're living in the world, big industries will use whatever the cheapest form of sugar is. So you can do some research as to whether or not generally the candy industry or the chocolate bar industry or the breakfast cereal industry, whether they are generally using non-vegan sugar or if they're using vegan sugar. But that will change from place to place. I mean, like within the United States is a big country. It's possible that in some states the cheapest available form of sugar happens to be vegan. But in many, many places it's not. In many places this is an industry standard way to refine sugar, and it may be the cheapest form available. But generally when they want to make sugar that has this kind of bright, that reflects light in a pleasing way, those varieties of sugar tend to be refined using bone char, and those are animal bones, byproduct of the meat industry. So she comments, in Japan, the United States, and Canada, most of the sugar being used in processed foods does have bone char. Apparently, she says in some parts of Europe, it's the opposite. Again, this is my impression generally, but you have to check wherever you're living. It can vary from place to place. She says, we are going to Japan on the 5th of November. Oh, okay, that's coming up in just a few days. 5th of November 2016. Okay, have a nice trip. I realized that avoiding bone char sugar would be not being able to eat any processed food, such as candy. But again, anything containing sugar. She gives the example of rice crackers, mirin, but even soup. Most soup has sugar in it. So, and there's no way to find out whether a product is made with beet sugar or cane sugar. It's even more complicated than that, whether or not it happens to be vegan, because it's the processing method used. So she has come to the conclusion that avoiding sugar is taking veganism a step too far beyond its definitions. This is in reference to the original definition of veganism being that you do everything that is practicable. Not practical, practicable. In English, those are two slightly different words with slightly different meanings. So she says, I talked about it with my boyfriend, and he had come to the same conclusion. So I wonder how the so-called junk food vegans can exist in the U.S. if all cookies, snacks, and soft drinks are produced with this non-vegan sugar. So again, it varies, but yeah, the vast majority, my impression is the vast majority in the United States are produced with non-vegan sugar. Well, and she may or may not know it, but some of the raw vegans and some of the vegans who oppose all processed food or all cooked food, they do invoke this kind of concept. They do draw attention to the fact that in general, the sugar in processed food of any kind is not going to be vegan. And there are some people who choose to be raw vegan or to refuse to buy anything that's in a box, whether they refuse to eat a chocolate bar, they refuse to eat breakfast cereal, or anything like that. So recently her boyfriend also found that the alcohol-free beer he enjoyed was not 100% vegan, not because of any of the ingredients, but because the glue used to fix the label to the bottle was not completely vegan. So non-vegan glue is a problem in the packaging of many allegedly vegan products because the glue used for the bottle or the box may not be really vegan. And then beyond that, she says, the glue used in allegedly vegan shoes may not be vegan. Correct. So I knew about that for I don't know, years now. I've known about that for quite some time, that it is a problem that you can be using. But even when you look into mainstream shoes and even specialized vegan shoes, actually the glue that's used to keep the different layers of the sole affixed to one another, that is very often a non-vegan glue. So the interesting thing here, this is not how she phrases it in her email. To me, the most interesting, intellectually stimulating thing here is that in some ways, vegans actually indulge in some of the same distinctions of convenience that vegetarians engage in. Vegans do, to some extent, make a distinction between what is a product and what is merely a byproduct, because we have to, we have to live in the modern world. We have to be able to buy shoes that do not have leather, but are nevertheless not vegan. So she says, do you think about the glue when you find a pair of shoes in your size? Do you think about the glue that's used to affix a tag or a label to juice, cucumbers, etc., etc.? She says, I don't even think it's good to promote avoiding sugar and glue as vegans, because this might just discourage people from being vegan entirely. It's already enough of a challenge, obviously, for many people to live without wool, silk, beeswax, and other hidden ingredients, like L-cysteine. There are many, many hidden ingredients. Right. And she also says, I wonder if boycotting refined sugar can bring any change to the sugar industry. Right. So, it breaks down to, look, to me, there are sort of three things to say about this. One, when you actually buy sugar in a bag, when you buy sugar as an ingredient to use yourself, if you're baking bread yourself, that's when you can make the choice. That's when you can make the decision to use a vegan sugar as opposed to a non-vegan sugar. That's when you have the power and the option as a consumer. But there are many, many contexts when, as a consumer, you do not have the option. And that is why, to come back to something you may have heard before on this channel, we have to get organized and we have to get involved in political lobbying. Obviously, things would change if we had a law passed in any country, if we had a law passed that was addressed to actually labeling products about what type of sugar was used in their manufacture. Then you could have the beginnings of consumer choice to distinguish between the same way that some people want to label genetically modified versus non-genetically modified so that consumers have the choice. If you start to label it, you have the beginning of something. You could also tax them differently. You could have a very mild, 1% tax to encourage industry to be using the non-bone char sugars. And as I understand it, in most products, if you're not actually making something like a hard candy where the appearance of the sugar matters, they can use vegan sugar and get results that are just as good. Now, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someone who's a real expert on making candy is going to explain to me that there are other subtle differences. But to my knowledge, almost all food, when it's not apart from the appearance of the food, using vegan sugar does not have any disadvantage. And it's only a few foods that would really matter for. So we need labeling, we need taxation. And without laws from the top down, without lobbying for hierarchical change, we're never going to get those changes. There are some changes we cannot agitate for simply as disaggregated, isolated individuals, and this is one example. I mean, another example you might not care about because you probably don't smoke cigarettes, the difference between vegan and non-vegan cigarettes. That's also something where you need to have labeling and maybe taxation and other policies, what have you. But the third thing I've already mentioned, I think is interesting, is that we like to think that veganism is in a completely separate category from vegetarianism because we refuse to play the game of saying, well, this is a product and this is a byproduct, and that products matter ethically, whereas byproducts do not. But when we get into some of these difficult gray areas, actually, vegans are forced to make some of the same compromises that vegetarians make. Because at the end of the day, we have to wear shoes, and we have to buy products with labels, and we can't choose, the glue that's used for the label, and it's possible even the company making that product can't choose. I don't know. I've never looked into that. When I was working in the book publishing industry, I looked into the chemistry of the glues used for binding books. Whew, the devil is in the details. That's scary, And traditionally, even the glue that's used to affix wallpaper to the wall had animal products in it, animal fat, animal skin, basically. So, we make the choices that we can make as individuals, but then we get organized so that we can press forward with the choices that we can't make as mere individuals.